5 years that we've been developing Jetpack Compose. It's the standard for building Android UI.
And now, we're finally in the Compose first era.
It's easier than ever to go from what you envision to pixels on the screen.
Looking back through all this history is a remarkable reminder of what we have achieved together. To everyone who filed a bug report, wrote a library, wrote a blog post, you built this too.
Whether you've been there from the start or you haven't tried it yet, now is the best time ever to build with Compose.
Happy birthday, Compose!
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 Hi everyone, and welcome to Jetpack Compose's birthday livestream. I'm your host, Rebecca Franks, and I've enlisted some of the Jetpack Compose team members with me today to talk all about Jetpack Compose. We have with me today
I'm Pullen-Freilich, engineer on the Compose team.
I'm Clara Bayarri, the eng lead for Android Toolkit.
And I'm Nick Butcher, the Jetpack Compose product manager.
This week we are celebrating Jetpack Compose's 5th birthday since the first stable release. And we've had some fun in-person events in London, Mountain View, New York, and with Bangalore happening on Saturday. So we thought, let's celebrate online for those who couldn't join us before in person. Before we talk a little bit more about Compose, I'd love to encourage you to pop your burning questions into the chat whilst the show goes on, and we'll get to answering them as we can. But wait, this is a party, and what's a party without hats and cake? Thanks.
Now can I blow this?
Yeah!
Woo!
But this is hard.
Great. Now we're ready. I love yours.
Do I have to wait the whole time?
First up, Nick is going to give us a quick rundown of how Compose has changed over the years. Thanks, Nick.
Yeah, thanks very much, Rebecca. So, Jetpack Compose, it's been 5 years since we announced that Jetpack Compose had gone 1.0, that it was stable and ready for production. But actually, we started working on Compose a little bit before that. So I don't know, is it 5 years old? Is it older than that? It was around about 2018 when the team started looking at what the future was going to be for our UI toolkit. And we started baking a number of ideas. And it was around 2019 at Google I/O where Ramangi announced the brand new toolkit. You couldn't quite get your hands on it just yet. You had to build it from source, so it was a developer preview. But then we went forward to 2021 when we actually announced it going stable. So since then, we've been working really hard on giving you all of the features, the performance, the tools, everything that you need to build amazing applications. Some highlights for me were when we added some new form factors, so we've seen Compose spread from just mobile devices to also supporting things like Android Wear, like Compose for TV, and even going beyond the UI layer, so using the Compose state model in many places like in Navigation Free. We've also added lots of great features to the toolkit. Some of my favorites are things like the shared element transitions, or some of the improvements that we've done in helping you build for many different devices out there. And we've seen many people adopting it and embracing Compose and using it to build amazing applications. And that brings us up to this year, where we announced at Google I/O this year that we are Compose first, which means that all of our focus is on Jetpack Compose, and the View toolkit, which it replaced, is now in maintenance mode, so it will get no new features and only receive critical bug fixes going forward. So yeah, we're definitely in the Compose first era.
Hey.
And it wasn't just us. Jetpack Compose was very much built with you, with the community. So for everyone who gave us feedback on what you thought, how Compose was evolving throughout the time, if you filed a feature request or filed a bug report or chatted to us in some of our forums like Slack, then thank you so much. For everyone who built libraries on top of Compose or who shared blog posts or gave a conference talk about it, you built this with us. We've been blown away by some of the creativity that we've seen out there, some of the uses that you've put Compose to, making command line apps and back-end data logic management and all sorts. So thank you to the community who built this with us. And we're not done yet. There's still a lot that we have to come. So a few things that I'm really excited about. So we're working more on our adapter support and helping you to build for the many different form factors that Android lets you build for. We're working really hard on some really exciting graphical effects, so I know you're very excited about this as well, Rebecca. To help you build really beautiful applications. Performance is always important to us. Performance is never done, we can always do more, and any work that we do, I think, supports all developers building with Compose. So make sure you're on that latest version of Compose to benefit from all the work we're pouring into performance improvements. More customization of our components. We've heard from you that you want our components to be more customizable, and we're working on some new APIs like styles, which we've talked about a little bit, to help you with that. And another one I'm really interested in is something called A2UI, which is a library to help you build agentic UIs on the fly. So at runtime, having an AI agent constructing a Jetpack Compose native UI. So that's really exciting. It's something we're baking, and stay tuned for more on that. That's all I had. That's all I wanted to talk about. It's just a little set the stage of the last 5 years. But I'm excited to hear what your questions are from everyone. What do you want to know about Compose?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. There's so much to look forward to. I'm personally very excited about all the graphic stuff, as you mentioned. I love a fancy shader, and maybe the keen eye might have noticed that the cake I made is an interpretation of a mesh gradient. Maybe? Okay, so I'd love to know from everyone here. So pop your questions in the chat, we'll get to them, but I've got a couple of questions for the team. My first question for you all is, what has been your personal highlight over the last 5 years? We'd love to hear from the audience too, so drop it down below.
It's a great question. I think I've just been so happy to see how much community adoption we've had. I think, Nick, you covered some of the community work that we've seen, people adopting Compose in interesting ways we didn't even consider. But there's just been so much, love and support for what we've been building, the collaboration from partners and everyone in the community just telling us what they'd like to see, us working with them to help enable that. It's been a really nice, rewarding experience to be working on that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's such a big question. I think to me the highlight is kind of the care that's been put into it. And I think I've rarely seen maybe the craftsmanship that the team has shown, and kind of putting a lot of thought into every API. And I think we've talked in the past about how we did a lot of research around every shape. To me, that's it's incredible that we build a product with that in mind and always prioritize what was the right thing, what was more useful for developers. It's been a fun journey to really try and unlock that.
One moment that stands out for me, one of my favorite moments, was when Compose went beta before we went stable at 1.0. We really wanted to get more feedback. So some people had tried out the alphas, but it's quite scary, right? An alpha of a brand new UI toolkit, that's quite a thing to ask. So we were wondering, how can we do something fun that might incentivize people to try it out? And we came up with the idea of running this dev challenge. So this was a competition where we would had a series of 4 challenges, 1 per week, where we issued challenges to the community. There was one which was build a puppy adoption app. There was one which is build the most creative timer app. There was a weather app. My favorite one was a speed challenge. We had this idea that Compose made it faster and easier to build UI. So we're like, right, let's test it. So we issued a design, a mock, and the first person to submit a PR implementing that mock in the shortest amount of time won a prize, won a phone, I think it was, which was really fun. Because before that, we'd played internally with the toolkit. We thought it was good, but it's only when you get it in the hands of your customers that you actually find out, do they like it? Is this resonating? Is it solving their needs? So it was that moment when it's like, oh my gosh, all these people are using it and they're building things and they're posting it and they're excited and they like this, and they maybe didn't like all of it, but we learned so much, and just seeing people get their hands on it, for me, that was like a real moment where it went from something that we were baking internally to something that was out there, that was being used. So that for me was a moment.
And people were able to actually build fun things with it as well.
Oh my gosh.
I remember, I wasn't at Google at the time, but making my own puppy app and the timer, it was very fun. I enjoyed it.
And looking at the video recently, they were really good. I think sometimes when you don't look at something for a while, I assumed it was kind of rougher at the time, and I'm like, no, these were really nice.
Nice examples, yeah.
That was fun.
So we kind of mentioned all the different teams that we have working on different areas of Compose and all these different features coming up. So I'd love to know what kind of work goes into building out a new feature in Compose, and how does this team decide to work on what next?
Well, I can take a first swing at that. Based on customers' needs. So really, we spend a lot of time talking to developers, all of us, I think, on the team of probably interacting with developers in some way or other. Like, you know, we read lots of your comments, your blog posts, your Reddit posts, whatever it is. We talk directly to a lot of app partners. We have user experience research teams who do a lot of work. And we kind of like throw all of this kind of input into a hopper, and we kind of look at what are the biggest needs, the developers, like what aren't we meeting? What do we need to do a better job of? Our guiding principles, like for a long time we were trying to reach parity with the Vue system. We knew that was really important to you, that, you know, you couldn't adopt Compose unless it had certain features. So that was a hugely important thing. Performance, you know, is always very, very important. Performance is definitely a feature. So we had a few like guiding principles that were helping us prioritize our work. But then, yeah, looking and listening to what developers are telling us is definitely the thing.
But also balance, so yes, but also balance. We've always kept this, the engineering team are so invested and love what they're building so much that leaving some space for sometimes there's random ideas that come out of the person who's been working on input for 4 years, knows exactly the next nice thing for input. And we try to balance that as well. So we make space for things that maybe people haven't asked for. Because I remember when we first showed and developers Compose, they were like, we didn't ask for this either, right? So there's that guiding principle if you want to mix the things that you're asking for with the things that you think are right, and finding a balance there.
Definitely.
I was one of those people who was like, am I going to use this? No, I don't believe you. Well, here we are 5 years later.
Hopefully you've changed your mind since
I
then.
have, yes.
Good.
Great. I have a question for Louis on this. So we talked a little bit about like deciding on the features and how the team works together and takes community input and balances all the different inputs to choose what to work on next. But how does the team balance this with keeping the API surface manageable and like making sure that the performance of what we are producing is of a good level?
Yeah, it's a great question. And obviously, like, we have a lot of developers, you know, with many different needs that we have to meet, right? So there's no one-size-fits-all API. So I think a really important thing that we've always really cared about in the team is layering, right? It's like making sure we have good stories, good APIs at every layer of what we're trying to enable developers to do. So we want to have a nice top-level API that does the simple thing most of the time it works, but make sure that's built on top of a good set of APIs below that really enable you to do more custom stuff, right? And I think by encoding that layering into the APIs and making sure we have options at different levels, that also kind of answers the question of like, how do I know which to use? Because there aren't really competing choices at the same layer of abstraction, right? It's like, are you doing something simple, or do you want some more power and go for an API that gives you more options but maybe takes more time to learn, right? So I think that's like really the secret, is making sure we have across the entire spectrum, not only of like use cases, but even complexity of those use cases, making sure we have different APIs at each level.
Yeah, I think where I really saw the value of that was, for instance, working with material draws. I was like, okay, this is great, and that gives me the defaults of what material advisors is the best, but my designer has given me something that's like a little bit more niche. And at that point I was like, oh, I can just drop down to using something like anchored draggable, and then, you know, layer into that approach of taking all these smaller components, building out, tweaking it to my needs, and making it work exactly how I want it. So I do kind of see that in some of these things.
Yeah, definitely.
Which is great.
I think that was a learning we took from the Vue system, right? Like, so Recycler Vue, I think, is a great example where it was an incredibly, like, you know, well-built, amazing component, but if it didn't support your use case, it was very hard to kind of like go in there and change its behavior. And so we learned from that experience, right, that we didn't want to repeat that kind of setup. So we wanted to build something where if the top level, you know, easy out-of-the-box component doesn't quite meet your use case, like you were saying, that you can drop down. So that was definitely something we learned.
Yeah, I think the guiding principle I often hear myself repeating and hearing in the team is, let's just get out of the way of developers, right? Like, we never want to be in that firing path of the only option you have as a developer is to file a bug to us and say, please add this feature. And I think Recycler Vue is exactly the example of what happens when you go down that path. So, you know, if we can enable developers to be successful without us having to build whatever we need for them, that's like already a win in my book.
For sure.
Okay, so we've got some questions that have come in from the live chat. So one of the questions is, what is the major reason you think we should develop a new UI framework, Jetpack Compose, when XML was already available in 2018?
That's a good one. And I think I've talked about this sometimes. When we started thinking about Compose, it wasn't Compose as you know it now. It was more, we got to a point where the toolkit was a good 10 years old at that stage within Android. And we were running into several things at once. One was, back then Android had yearly releases and we were part of the actual OS. And so when you're in that bundle of a yearly release cycle, any bug you fix takes forever to kind of make it outside. Plus, by being in the OS, developers had no control. Like, we were updating the framework from below, and so there's kind of a trade-off of who gets to control when you change things. There was also the part of just, it took several years for people to actually get those updates, right? Like, we would hear from developers very often, like, oh, you've just released this bug fix, but 0.1% of my users are getting it. Plus, we were getting to a point where, with 10 years worth of history and lots of apps built on that framework, people were relying on broken behaviors that we wanted to fix, but we couldn't fix because we were going to break apps. I remember working on text at the time, and it's like, well, I know this line breaking is wrong, but if we fix this bug, I'm going to break thousands of apps out there. So we were kind of cornered. And then it started from the idea of unbundling the toolkit out of platform, which solved a lot of these issues. And it's around the same time that support lib was a thing, but Jetpack wasn't really a thing yet. We were starting to explore libraries as an option. And then we said, well, let's pull the toolkit out into a library. And then while you're at it, you might as well start from scratch. And so then around that time, declarative programming was really starting to take off, and you start mixing all those things. That's kind of how we decided that we needed to leave the XML system behind. Was just, we ran into a bunch of things. It was hitting kind of weird dead ends, and clearly the trend was in a different direction that allowed us to do kind of new things. And yeah, the investment paid off.
Cool. I want to talk a little bit about performance. So performance is always kind of top of mind for us, and I know we are doing lots of things that maybe aren't so visible to people, but what would you say are some quick wins that developers can do looking to optimize their Compose UI? Anyone?
I can go, like, be on the latest version is the very first thing. So if we're always working on performance, it's very important, like you say, and if you stay on the latest version, then you can benefit from that. And it's not just the version of Compose, but also on things like AGP. I know it can be harder than we might like sometimes to upgrade AGP, but it's so worth it. Like, I think in the latest version of AGP, we just, in R8, which ships with AGP, we just shipped a change to how coroutines are optimized by the R8 library, which, like, I think it doubles the performance of launching and cancelling a coroutine, which is, like, incredible. So there's, like, huge performance wins to be had without having to change a line of kind of production code of you, just having to update to the latest version. So that'll be the first thing I'd say.
And then following our guidance, because R8, enabling R8, very important, having baseline profiles, startup profiles, all of this is in our guidance, and it really helps boost, because kind of the main difference of the toolkit being in the platform is we used to be in memory when you start your app, now we're not, and so all of these things help counteract the fact that we've moved the toolkit into a library, but it's very important to, we have done all these mitigations around it, it's important for apps to actually benefit from them.
And to build on that as well, like, not just having R8 turned on, but also having it configured correctly, because quite often we've seen from field data that people might have R8 on, but there may be something that's causing it to skip optimizations. So we recently launched something called the R8 Configuration Analyzer, which is a tool that lets you, will run a report basically and tell you how much of your code is actually being optimized, or it'll actually identify if you have problematic keep rules, which are causing certain optimizations to be skipped or not applied to certain parts of your code base. So yeah, not just having R8 on, but also having it configured correctly can make a huge difference to your app's performance. Like, we've seen people save, many milliseconds off their, like, startup just by turning this on or realizing they had a bad keep rule.
And I think the other thing here is just measurement, right? Like, it's really important to measure, right, benchmarks, understand what is the performance you're actually trying to gain. If you don't measure it, you don't know if you changed it, right? And I think also being very, very concrete about, like, what are the CUJs you're trying to optimize for, right? Like, there's a very big difference in performance of startup compared to scrolling jank, right? So just making sure that's tracked is a really good baseline to make sure that you are actually making the targeted improvements and not sinking time into something that doesn't actually affect what you're trying to improve.
Yeah, I see a lot of people get very hung up on recomposition counts. I know we give you a recomposition count in the layout inspector, so maybe that's partly our fault for giving you a number to optimize. But yeah, really, I see a lot of people spending a lot of time worrying about that, but they don't actually have measurements over where they're actually spending the time. Does it actually help? Yeah, so you can't optimize what you don't measure. So I really think, like, be guided by the data. Like, yeah, use macro benchmark to have, key CUJs that you understand, and you have, like, alerting if they regress. I think is a good idea.
Cool. Our friends from the Kotlin channel have asked, how do you feel about Compose multi-platform?
Good one.
Hi, Kotlin friends.
I can take it, yeah. JetBrains have been building Compose multi-platform for, I guess, more than 5 years now. I think we started collaborating way before 1.0. It is a JetBrains product, but we've been working with them throughout. We enable them. We are responsible for the Android side of Compose, and they build kind of the other platforms, but we work with them very closely. We make sure we don't break them. It's been a great collaboration.
Cool. Yes, it has. All right, we've got some other questions around. Can you speak to your plans for Jetpack Glance and widget development with Jetpack Compose?
I can take this.
Sure.
Yeah, so we have Jetpack Glance is a library that we built a couple years ago. For those who are familiar with the API surface that was already there until like about 6 months ago, we did something innovative back then, which was we decided to abstract developers off of remote views. And to do that, we built this API called Glance that is built on top of the Compose runtime, but purely the runtime. We didn't really want to pull in the entire UI toolkit. And so it is a set of libraries that utilize kind of our tree invalidation system and being able to build a hierarchy. In the last year, we've been, well, more than a year, but maybe publicly the last year, we've been working on this new backend. We're calling it Remote Compose. And the idea being we built this system that allows us to capture a composition, transform it down into a document that can be sent over the wire, and then a player that is able to read that and play on the other side. It allows us to capture mostly canvas calls, but we can also do like pretty nice animations based on layouts, and so it's a pretty capable system. And we've started deploying that into Glance. And so Glance right now, as of the current version, is capable of producing Remote Compose documents, and so we're adding a lot more capabilities to it, but we can't fully replace the API surface just yet. Because Remote Compose is bundled, the player side is bundled into the OS. And like I mentioned before, whenever we do something, it takes a couple of years for actual like mass reach to most of your users. And so we have to wait for the beginnings of that player that we embedded to really roll out, because otherwise we would break people's backwards compatibility of widgets. We don't want to do.
Yeah.
I think the key here is we're just leading into Compose as like the way to think about writing Android UI, right? So it's consistent patterns and mental model across all of our surfaces.
Talking about different surfaces,
it's a good
Louis,
segue.
yeah, great. You've worked on Jetpack Compose Glimmer, the toolkit for building UI for display glasses. But before that, you were also part of building the original set of material components. So I'd love to know how you found the shift between building these two different toolkits and how much overlap there was when building for glasses versus a normal mobile phone.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it really speaks to also what I was mentioning before about our layering, right? Like, I think one of the things we want to make really clear or make really easy for developers is it doesn't really matter what form factor or what surface you're using, but the mental models and the API should be the same, right? So like one of the things we've done consistently throughout these is make sure that when there's behaviors or commonalities that we need across form factors, really, non-design system, non-form factor specific things, we want to make sure it's available in like a lower form. So actually a lot of the work we did across both of these surfaces was making sure that, the foundation and UI layers had more capabilities, right? So like if we need some new focus capabilities, we're working on the focus system. We're not just building new things that are specific for, Jetpack Compose Glimmer, for example. So I think it's really good for two reasons. One, it means that the actual end user APIs and the mental model and the patterns are similar, no matter what the design system or form factor is. And then it also means that we're investing into the toolkit as a whole, and improvements we make for one form factor also help other form factors, right? So like in some ways, obviously the constraints are different, but I think the overall work is pretty similar, to be honest. Like we still have, UI components, the way they look and feel is the same. We've aligned on Compose patterns for general component development over the years, so hopefully it's a pretty consistent experience for our developers and across all these surfaces.
Cool. Anyone to add? No? All right. Why haven't you decided to replace the Gradle build system? This might not be great for this live stream, but let's see. It's slow and heavy, and it's one of the main reasons I gave up on pursuing a career in Flutter development. Okay. I'm not sure those two are
It's not really so I think worth checking at I.O. I think the studio team talked about like build.
Yeah.
Worth going to look at that.
Okay, so we have some more questions. What would you say, based on, so over the past couple of years, we've had many technical challenges to solve. At the meetup, you were talking about modifiers and the migration of modifier performance. What has been the most challenging thing for you over these couple of years, and would you do anything differently if you had to look back?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the real important part to note here, right, is like we're actually building on top of a system that not only has a lot of code that exists in XML and views, but also is evolving throughout this period of time as well, right? And Compose has to work consistently within this model. We can't just like rip out everything else that existed before and start afresh. Like you still have to be able to write and run Compose code in like an Android application, right, using Android APIs. We're still rendering to views like at a lower level, right? So I think the challenge has really been how do we ensure that we can build a new feeling UI toolkit that has all the APIs and the goals we want to enable, and kind of abstracting the stuff underneath from developers, right? So typically the challenging parts have been how do we cover or like manipulate view things that we have to integrate with into Compose without pushing that complexity to the developer. So I think Ripples and Overscroll are a really good example of this, where Ripples and Overscroll, it's their Android concepts, they've existed for a long time, they have a lot of behavior in the platform. We don't want to rip everything on the start again, but we also need to make sure there's an easy Compose feeling way of interacting with these systems. So I think trying to make sure that we can do that in a way where, as a Compose developer, you don't even know that we're using framework code under the hood is really important. Making sure the APIs are simple, performant, and then trying to handle that mess underneath so it's all nice for everyone else on the outside. But it took a lot of time to make that work.
Cool. I know we've also briefly spoken about styles at Google I/O recently. Do you want to speak a little bit to how that's contributing to some performance goals that we're working on?
Yeah, I think it's another point also. I think one of the questions earlier or the points earlier was about how do we like add new features and make sure there's there's performance and there's alignment across these layers. We're not duplicating stuff. I think there's always there's kind of two different things we have going on, right? Like one of them is how do we make sure that the core systems we already have are performant and optimized, and if you know what you're doing, you can write efficient code. And then I think there's also identifying gaps in our current API offering and figuring out are there areas where we're missing something that makes it easier. And I think Styles is a really great example of that second part, where we figured out that if you're motivated and you have all the knowledge, you can build performant modifiers and integrations with them. But sometimes it's not easy, and sometimes you have to really like work to make it do the thing you want. And I think Styles was basically us saying, what if we provided an API where actually performance out of the box is kind of the goal, and the API itself encourages good performance and makes things easier. And I think the important thing to note here is this isn't a totally new system. It's still built on top of all of the work we've done in the past with modifiers and the systems underneath. So we're still reusing and benefiting from that work. It's just providing a different way that you can access this in an API that's easier to use and more performant by default.
And maybe this is the first example where we're actually exposing very openly an API surface that we're changing something, but it is a reflection of, I think, the last 5 years of Compose. It's been a journey of learning how are people using our system, which we can never fully anticipate. We have kind of hunches and guesses, and we build a system that we think will be performant, and then seeing real usage and being like, oh, we need to change that. And I think we've been going through I feel like we've rewritten every major system inside Compose, but we've always tried to keep it as API stable as possible. So probably developers haven't noticed, right? Or hopefully they haven't noticed, but we have been completely swapping everything under the hood. Because my favorite example is we set out to build a UI toolkit that handled a tree of layout nodes. Because we're like, yeah, people build UI and they have little, and then I think 2 years later, I remember the TL at the time coming and being like, we built a tree of modifiers that has a couple of layout nodes sprinkled in there, but we optimized for layout nodes. And that's where like the big modifier rewrite happened, where we had to rebalance the system out of what we were seeing people do. I think Styles is a similar, like we've gotten very far. It's the first time where we're actually exposing new API because we think it is necessary, but it's readjusting to what we're seeing people do and how do we help them get on a healthier path.
Yeah, just a reminder to pop your questions into the chat. If you have anything for the team, we're answering them live for you. So this is not pre-recorded. Well, it is if you're watching it back, but semantics. Okay, so what happened to the first-party snapshot testing? I think they mean screenshot testing? Yes, it was announced and then kind of disappeared.
It's still baking, yeah, so it's still there. So recently the team has been working on, I believe, moving from, well, it launched as its own dedicated Gradle plugin so that we could iterate quickly on it. But it's reached a point where we're now migrating it and graduating it back into the AGP plugin. So work is still going, like it's taking some time, we acknowledge that, but we want to get it right. So still coming, there's work happening, stay tuned.
Cool. So I want to talk a little bit about adaptive layouts. So I know we had, or maybe just adaptive in general. So I know we had some talks at I/O that mentioned a couple of new APIs and things that people can work on or use. What would you say if somebody was starting out today with an app that doesn't adjust to different device sizes? What would you suggest they do?
So one of my favorite APIs that we offer is something called the Device Configuration Override API, which is like a testing API, which can really help you to test out how your layouts react to different configurations. So you can very easily try it out in different like screen sizes or densities and so on. And so I think that's a great thing to do, and I think that in conjunction with like screenshot testing can be very, very powerful. So you can set up like parameterized tests, so that you can like create a snapshot test of your layout in different configurations. So I think that helps people like see where they're at, and you can also use the preview feature. We have like the devices preview, which gives you a pre-baked set of devices to preview a layout on. So I think check it is the first thing I would say. Like, users are trying to use your app in many different. Android comes in all shapes and sizes, and users are trying to use it. So I think understanding like where your app is at is probably the first step I would start with.
Yeah, then I'd point them to, in material design, we have a bunch of guidance of, if you don't know, if you're like, I have a phone app, how do I stretch it out? We have a bunch of published guidance with like how are canonical apps using that screen. So there's kind of a design aspect of deciding what your app should be doing. And then we have a bunch of different APIs that help you use the space. So there's both the Material Adaptive Layouts Library. Nav3 has added support for scenes, which also allows to kind of coordinate different parts of a screen appearing or not appearing, depending on your size and navigation state.
And then we're working on some new stuff as well. So they're currently experimental, but we have new grid layout, flexbox layout, and media query APIs coming. So experimental, hoping to stabilize them based on developer feedback, your feedback soon. But they can help you build more adaptive layouts. So grid in particular, I'm very excited about. It's inspired by the CSS grid from the web, and it helps you to kind of like, I think it's great as like a root level layout when you might want to change how things majorly are laid out. So whether you have like a sidebar or 2-pane layout or 3-pane layout. So that in conjunction with Nav3 is really, really powerful. Nav3 scenes is a great way to kind of like really at the root level divide up your space and react to, when you have more screen real estate, don't just stretch things, but be able to like, use the opportunity to show more things at once.
Talking about Nav3, any update? This is a question from the chat. Any update on the Compose navigation graph previews like we had in XML?
Any update on that? I think we've gone back and forth on that because Nav3 is incredibly flexible, right? You bring your own backstack basically. So that flexibility comes at the cost of tooling. It's much, much harder to tool because it's code, right? You can like manipulate your backstack. The graph isn't like deterministic. It's kind of like you can manipulate it at runtime. So we're toying with different ideas. There are different things we could do. I'd be interested to hear what people want. Like, would you be prepared to give up some of that flexibility and maybe like annotate your code somehow so that tooling could read that information and give you something? Would that be useful to you? Like, tell us what you want here. But really, it was a trade-off, really. So I think people are enjoying the flexibility. From what I hear, most developers seem to really enjoy the fact that you no longer have previously navigation kind of held onto the backstack and you were trying to synchronize your state to it, whereas now, like in the Compose way, we kind of let you hoist that state outside so you own it and you kind of really are in control of it, and we just react to changes in that backstack that you give us. But I do think the downside is it's much, much harder to tool. So we'd love to hear if you have ideas of what you'd like to see, or would you like to give up some of that flexibility in order for tooling. So I'll be interested to hear what people say.
Cool. Another one from chat. Stability inference is still a common source of confusing bugs. Are there compiler improvements coming that reduce the need for manual at stable or at immutable annotations? Maybe Louis?
Yeah, well, for the last couple of releases, we've had strong skipping mode turned on by default. So I think in many cases, actually, you don't need to worry so much about manual annotations. Even without the annotations, we can still compare and skip if things haven't changed, if we return equals properly. So I would say this is something that was definitely true for the early days of Compose. I'm not sure now it's such a big concern, to be honest. If there are loose ends or things that don't work, then please let us know. And there are also other options, right? So there's ways you can tell the compiler, even for things you don't own, to mark certain types as stable without needing the annotation. So I think with a combination of these, like for those in the cases where you really do need to do it, but again, I'm not sure. I'm not sure in most cases this is a recent concern. I would say it's definitely something that existed in the early days of Compose.
I'd add to that, there's also some great community skills out there for helping your agents to identify these cases. And we don't have an official one yet, but I've seen some really good community ones out there. So maybe that's something that you could look at. But I would reiterate again, like measure before you worry overly around like stability. Like stability, can be an issue, but since strong skipping, we've seen in our data it be much less of an issue. But yeah, data over worrying about it like for no reason.
Yeah. This leads me to talking a little bit about AI. I guess there's a couple of questions here that might semi-be related. So one of them is, what is the best way to migrate from XML views to Compose? So that's the first one. And I feel like you're going to say something to do with AI. That might be my response.
I mean, we previewed something at Google I/O we're working on as a feature in Studio to help you do that, and we also released a skill on our official skill repository to help you doing that. So yeah, AI is definitely the way forward. Fun fact, actually, we looked at some tooling like from XML to Compose, and we ended up not launching it. And the reason was that you can mechanically translate from a linear layout to a row or a column. That's pretty easy. But what we found is that when most people were adopting a Compose, it usually came with like a data flow change, right? Like you were probably moving from like MVVM or MVP or something into something like MVI that's much more Compose friendly. And back in the day, like that just was kind of like beyond the scope of what we could really do in kind of like some Android Studio tooling, whereas that AI now is like shown that it is capable of doing these things. So I think like it's really exciting that AI is now giving us the tools to attack this problem.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions around how AI is going to help with Jetpack Compose. So I think we're seeing that, right? A lot of the skills that we're releasing are helping at least some internal teams as well, being able to migrate to certain APIs. And we're also trying to make these newer APIs, bundle them with a kind of skill at the same time to ensure that if you are using any AI tools, you are able to easily migrate and use these new APIs.
And we do a lot of evaluation, right? Like we have like a benchmarking project where we kind of see how good different models are at writing for Android, and we have a lot of kind of tests there for Compose, and so we do monitor and see where they're failing, and we actually use that to kind of inform some of our skills and plug where the models aren't quite and doing it yet, or where they don't know about the newest best practices and so on. So yeah, definitely a very interesting space.
Okay, there's a lot of questions on focus. Come on, Rebecca, tell me big work is in progress for focus management on TV. I'll just join this with the next question, which is around the same thing. We're running into several focus management issues on Android TV using Compose. Is there anything planned to address this? I'm noticing the frequent loss of focus, particularly when popping the backstack.
Yes, initial focus or focus restoration when you go back we've known it's a pain point for a while. It's one of those where we can't just go and fix a bug. Like it's not as simple as just go and fix the one thing. So it's taking us a while to kind of put a proper plan in place. We're currently looking at all of these things, and I hope soon we will have it resolved. Focus, I said we kind of tend to go and rewrite entire systems. Focus is the one that is currently in work in progress.
And I think I would echo also that I see a lot of comments about TV specifically, but again, focus isn't something unique to TV, right? So it's really important that when we do make these changes and fix things, we're fixing it for every platform where focus is important, and making sure we have a consistent set of APIs that allow you to control this, regardless of what you're targeting. So, yeah.
Yeah, it also speaks to kind of the evolution of Compose a bit. When we started, we were very focused, obviously, on phones, because that's what we were trying to solve at the moment. And from the early days, we worked with Where, and we set up Where Compose is a great library. We learned a lot in building it. And I think over the last few years, a lot of the effort we've been doing together with the Where team, together with the TV team, has been on finding the common problems that actually core Compose should solve. Like we unblock many things by solving problems in Where or in TV, but actually now we're at the point where we would love for the core of Compose to be able to support focus. Because you may be connecting a D-pad navigation to a tablet, right? Like there's so much crossover of use cases that actually we want Compose to be able to handle this, and we've been investing a lot in that, which maybe is not as visible from outside, but it's a huge investment we've done when we think of adaptive, making Compose handle all of this out of the box. Similar with like keyboard navigation, trackpad support, all these kind of things.
Right. I guess for us, adaptive doesn't mean 10 different libraries, right? It means one library that handles things. So the more stuff that we can bring down into Compose, it's the better for everyone.
Yes, and there's more nuance to it, but yes.
Okay, animation question. I'm struggling to add shared element transitions to my app, and I'm wondering, is there anything available to help make this easier?
Feels like a question for you, Rebecca.
Yes, I think what I would say is we've released a new composable called Look Ahead Visual Debugging that you can add as a debug tool, and it gives you some really nice like borders
boxes.
and bounding boxes around everything that you're looking at it, and shows you when you're matching, when your elements are matching between each other. So there is some tooling, debug only, which is probably what you need. Yeah, so check that out. Okay, what else do we have? Okay, so if there is, I would love to know, so now we're going to get into a few silly questions.
Oh.
Maybe
Should we
unlock
put the hats back on? Or?
Put the hats back on. No, I'm joking. Okay, if you could sum up in Compose in one word, what would it be?
Okay, it's an easy answer, but honestly,
it's not one word.
I would say composable. And I think it's a double meaning, not only because it's obviously the name of the API, right? But I really do think it's part of our API story. It's like really making sure that we're building things in layers, small pieces that you can put together. I mean, it's where the name came from, right? But
I'm going to use two because this used to be our tagline, and we used to laugh all the time and almost do jokes of how many times could we say it in a single Compose talk. Faster and easier.
I'm just going to go with better. It's better than what we had before.
Cool. And then I think the final question that we're going to go with, unless there is anything else over there. All right. Is there any hidden Easter eggs or lesser known APIs that you feel developers should know about?
Ooh.
it's a good question.
They're not hidden, it's just that they don't know about.
Yeah.
We are open source, everything's out there.
And I think sometimes like hidden or not knowing about, maybe that's also like by design, right? Sometimes too, right? I mean, I think, we definitely build powerful APIs for many use cases across the spectrum. And if you're not doing something, advanced or complicated, maybe you don't need to use it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I would definitely point to like a lot of the capabilities of the modifier node APIs. Like you can build really complicated and performance systems, coordination between different modifiers on screen, handling pointer input, drawing and graphics, focus system interaction. There's a lot of stuff there that probably most folks don't interact with on a regular basis. And I think, one of the learnings we had there was, that's kind of where the motivation for style comes from. Like, how can we actually make use of these powerful capabilities we had and sort of expose it in an easier to use way? But yeah, definitely some of the modifier APIs, I would say there's a lot of capabilities there that are unexplored mostly.
I was just going to say, the layering you mentioned earlier, like I think the lesser known is because we've built higher level abstractions that you obviously use. The easy example is like look ahead layout. Like it's what powers shared element transitions, but most people don't need to know that exists, right? Mm-hmm. Or I know Chuck would say the applier. Like you can use Compose to handle tree diffs in any kind of environment that is not UI. Most people don't need to implement their own applier, right?
Yeah, I was going to say some of the animation APIs. So I think, we have lots of like top level animation APIs which are easy to use. Like you have animated visibility and you have animate through as state, which are really great. But I think if you drop down, there's some really powerful layers underneath it. So like the animatable class or transition APIs, you can orchestrate things, have a bit more control, and not directly used for animation API, but very useful for it is movable content. So this is the API that shared elements are built on top of, which lets you kind of reparent essentially some content from one position in the tree to another position in the tree, and it's what powers or underpins like shared element transition. And the reason I love it is that scarred maybe from the Vue days where we had to do a lot of smoke and mirrors to try and create things like shared element transitions where you were like, capturing a bitmap of this and then animating the bitmap and then loading the real view in on top and try and crossfade between them, and it's kind of painful. Whereas now with Compose you can actually have like the real content like transforming and moving and create very, very powerful, very rich, like beautiful effects based on these APIs. So I think some of the lower level like things maybe you don't need to know about them, and maybe the higher level APIs suit your need. But if you want to dive down and discover and look at the lower level guts, then there's some pretty powerful things you can do with it.
Cool. So we have got some late questions. One, we have not something about animation. So we have not had anything major with regards to Compose animations since the last major was shared transition. Any plans for when lazy layout animations or custom enter-exit transitions are coming? I think we have lazy layout animation.
We have some. I think people want like the item add, item remove. Planned.
Okay. Right. then the last one that we will go through is, what are you most excited about for the next 5 years? Should we do a 10-year of Compose?
Maybe. Yeah, I mean, I think now, we've announced recently we're Compose first. We expect that new Android, all Android development will happen in Compose. I think that gives us a lot of opportunities to, figure out what can we do to push the future forward. We spent some time trying to catch up on parity, as Nick mentioned, right? Making sure that we're really handling all the use cases that we needed to handle from what our users using Views were expecting. So now is the time where we can really push the boundaries and figure out, what are the new steps forward, right? So in another 5 years, we'll look back and say, like, wow, this really improved, how Android development was for everyone more. So.
Cool. Clara, anything exciting?
I think if you look back, these first 5 years were kind of more about figuring out how to cover all the API surface we had to do, how to plug in every gap that we had, and I think the next 5 years are probably going to be about maturity, right? And yes, I am also obviously excited about all the new stuff, but also we serve as a platform to every app that is in an Android device, and so being able to really go down and fine-tune everything and make sure we are kind of exposing the best of Android and making apps really belong in the Android ecosystem and be as performant as possible. I think a lot of that we will really be able to polish in the next few years.
Yeah, and to build on top of that, I think things are changing quite rapidly right now. I think AI is obviously a huge force in the industry right now, and I think that's changing what an app is and how people want to interact with their devices and their services and so on. So I'm really excited about how that's evolving. I think you're still going to use a device and it's still going to show you a UI at some point so that you can interact with it, but maybe the agent is actually pushing some of the buttons or constructing that UI on the fly. So I think things are changing in the app model right now, and so I'm really excited about how we can help serve developers so that they can participate in these changes and really find success in the new models as they emerge. So I think it's a huge time of change. So I can't even think 5 years ahead. That's too far. I'm not even certain a year, 2 years out exactly which way things are going. But things like A2UI I mentioned earlier are an interesting peek into that future where maybe an agent is building a UI on the fly for you. So I'm really interested in that space.
Cool. Well, thanks for joining and for answering all these questions. And that wraps up the birthday celebration here in the studio. We would love to keep the conversation going online, so feel free to reach out on socials and let us know how you're celebrating. Do you have cake, hopefully? We've also taken the time to interview some of the engineers on the team about their favorite API. So, studio team, roll the video.
Welcome to Compose TV. We're celebrating 5 years from Compose going 1.0, and for that I wanted to get the inside scoop from the team. What are they most proud of? What's their favorite API? What are their most memorable moments? So for that, let's go find the team.
One of the things that we did early on in Compose's development was we took on this idea of get out of the critical path of other people's features. So when you're working on a feature for yourself, you don't necessarily need to find the perfect API that does exactly what you need. We took on this philosophy of exposing in layers all of the different pieces that you might need to build up your own features on top of that instead. This is kind of in contrast to the way that we did things in the past, like Recycler View, where if you didn't find the feature that you were looking for, you were kind of stuck. I think it's one of the things that's worked out really well with Compose, and I'm really happy with how it's turned out.
I think the favorite thing I've done was seeing the first drawing rectangle on the screen. I think when I wrote the CL for that, I think that was really cool. I think I'm most proud of that. And my favorite API is rulers. I think it's a very seldom used, but I think really interesting API that I think a lot of people would find useful in the future.
I think my favorite thing about Compose is we set out to make the easy things easy and the hard things possible. In the Vue world, it's some things that you could do, but it would be a lot of effort. For example, we spent a long time trying to, teach you how you can make much better animations. We introduced new libraries like physics-based libraries and talked about how you could integrate them, but it was a lot of work. And then in Compose, we said, you know what, we're going to make this the default. So by default, all our animation APIs use springs. So they're interruptible and they maintain momentum and they give them a much nicer user experience. And I think things like that really speak to all of the learnings that we got from the Vue system that we poured into Compose to make those hard things possible and the easy things easy. easy, and that's why I love it.
My favorite API in Compose is a modifier API. Actually, when I just joined Compose, modifiers were introduced, and my first job was to migrate the old layout system to the modifiers. And it was nice to see how developers are loving the APIs because the APIs are so impressive and powerful at the same time. So yeah, modifiers are the best.
When Compose came out, my favorite thing about it was the compiler. Like, I was kind of always interested in digging into things and looking a bit deeper than most people did. And compiler at the time was like this thing that only very smart people would do, and like it was a very complicated piece of machinery for some reason. So I started digging, I started looking, and turns out it's actually not as hard. And now look at me, working on the compiler at Compose.
I think my favorite API is the device configuration override API. It was something I worked on to make testing easier, which is always a good thing. It's never been more important to make sure your apps are doing what you think they're doing. Makes it possible to change things on the fly, different sizes, different configurations, and it's an easy thing to do.
So I was thinking about my proudest memories in Compose, and I have to say, I'm really excited about how boring fonts are. I honestly no one asks questions about fonts, and that means we did a really good job, and I'm really excited about that. But if I think back to my favorite memory, it was definitely the whiteboard with Adam after we got the UXR study about modifiers, and they were full of like all these thens and pluses, and it looked like an algebra problem. And we figured out we could actually just do a Fluent API, and that turned into the entire API of Compose, and I was really, really excited to see that we really made modifiers the entire API of Compose.
I think it's kind of a tie between mutable state of and the applier interface. Mutable state of gives you fairly inexpensive observable objects, and the applier allows you to adapt the Compose runtime to just about any tree-shaped data structure.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite memories working from Compose, just before we cut the beta, the first Compose beta, I had a last-minute thought that maybe the interaction APIs we had built weren't going to scale long-term. And I remember messaging people around midnight before this cut, being like, I'm not sure, what do you think? Quickly drafted up a proposal, got some alignment, landed that just before the deadline, and surprisingly, it's stood all the way to this time.
I think the thing that I love most about Compose is the fact that it's actually building delightful UIs. For me, I think when you actually build something really cute, that's actually sparking the delight, and I just don't feel like that was possible until we had Compose. So things like shared element transition, or honestly the new style API. For me, I feel like we're really starting to scratch the surface on what we can do, and actually even the things we're gonna be working on, those are things that really excite me. So
okay, so my favorite part is the fact that the testing APIs were developed at the same time as the framework. And that meant that we were able to release testing APIs immediately in the first developer previews. We got a lot of early feedback, and today we have a really, really solid testing API surface that I'm really happy about.
I remember when we had an API called Swipeable, and I tried to fix a couple of bugs until I realized, wait, this is actually really hard, and I think we need to rewrite this thing. I fixed it and built the new anchor draggable APIs, and they're still holding up to this day.
My favorite API for Compose is the Media API. So you can play video, you can play audio, all in Compose. And what I love about it is that we really got the chance to re-envision this whole API together with the engineering team. And I was involved, and I really loved that collaboration.
I joined the team like less than a year ago, so I was mostly on the consumer side of the Jetpack Compose. But after I joined, I realized that our team is really diligent about Jetpack Compose APIs, and just like it's really amazing to see the progress throughout the whole journey.
I think my first API was nested scroll interrupt, which is also funny because it was more about views than Compose.
My favorite part about Compose has to be slot APIs, just because it happened at the beginning. We were trying to figure out like the material components and how were the APIs going to work. Kotlin was new to us, Lambdas were new to us, and suddenly it kind of clicked that we could suddenly insert parts of components into components. It's kind of everything that Compose means. Like we could compose different pieces, and then we gave it a name. We call it slot APIs, which I know is not the most inventive name, but it clicked, and I'm so proud of that's something we invented that really made sense.
My favorite thing about Compose, I do have to say I love the framework as it is right now. I love how it works, but I do have to say that I think my favorite thing about working on it is the team. The Compose engineers and Compose DevRel and everyone else on the team who has made Compose First what it is today and made it happen.
Happy birthday, Compose!